to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right. Looking for an approval of the regular agenda. Do I have a motion to approve?
I'll make that motion.
And a second.
Second.
Very good, gentlemen. All those in favor of approving the regular agenda signify by saying aye. Aye. And those opposed. Thank you, gentlemen. And the approval of the consent agenda. I'm sure you've gone through that. Do I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
And do I have a second?
Second.
Good. All those in favor of approving the consent agenda signify by saying aye, please. Aye. And those opposed. Thank you. We're going to move right into staff agenda items. City Engineer Brad Reefsteck is going to talk to us about declaring the costs and setting an assessment hearing for a road project we've been working on. Mr. Reefsteck, please.
Mayor and members of the council, thank you very much. Tonight I'm here to discuss the 2020 street improvement project. Like you said, we're here to declare the costs and set the assessment hearing. The first two items we have on my list here are both related to the 2020 street improvement project. And just to take you back a little bit, back in September of 2019, council accepted the feasibility report, which included a mock assessment for the project and some very conservative pricing for the overall project. In October, we had a public information hearing. Out of that public information hearing, council had directed us to put out a survey to the residents within the project limits to determine whether or not people were in favor of a project or not. We had a second public hearing in November, and out of that meeting, council ordered the following streets: Grenliff Avenue, Justin Trail, Gennaro Court, and 96th Street. And then in the process, the city engineer put together the plans and specs. Council accepted the plans and specs in January and authorized the city engineer to go out for bids. We took bids on February 6th. I provided a summary of those bids to you prior to the meeting. And so we're here tonight to declare the costs for the project. And so I just wanted to go through the background a little bit. And I do have a cost of $465,080 in my memo to you. Of that is included with the low bid of $387,567. And then the other piece that hasn't totally been incurred yet would include engineering, legal, financing, and administrative costs. So the total project costs were, like I said, $465,080. And then the city has budgeted and will be contributing $42,320 to the project. Now, these are maintenance dollars that the city would have used on these streets for maintenance purposes, and the council has agreed to use those or put those towards the project. So the total amount of the declared costs for the assessed project is $422,760. And I guess with that said, I would take any questions or comments you may have.
Nothing. Mr. Giefer on that?
No, I guess he said 422.
Well, when you go back in,
Total, okay.
you're at 465,080, everything else. John?
So, in looking at what you gave us before the meeting, the quotes. So, do we know of anybody who's used the low bid company? And do we normally just go with a low bid, or do we go with somebody who may be $10,000 more, but somebody that is known to us, or somebody that knows that does good work, something like that? So I'm just curious why the low bid wins.
Typically, we always would take the low bidder, as long as they're a responsible bidder. We would take the low bidder.
So we put it out to open bids, or did we select some companies that we know that are good companies when we took the bids?
No, so we advertise the plans and specs to be bid for 21 days, three weeks. It was a little over 3.5 weeks, actually. And so we opened up bids on the 6th of February. And so we received actually 6 bids, which is, I think, pretty good for the projects that this type of project. And so, and then the bids were really tight as well. I mean, we got really good pricing where the low was 387 and the high was 435. So they are typically really good bids, and again, as long as the low bidder is a responsible bidder, then I would recommend that. But tonight, this will be awarded typically after the assessment hearing, and we can discuss this in more detail. But I wanted to provide this to you because it really is a big chunk of the project cost of the $465,000. The other piece is 20% of the indirect cost, which is what we've been telling people in the feasibility report. Now, the original cost, I think, I don't remember what the original costs from the feasibility report were, but just looking at my engineer's cost for the pieces that we did provide is about a $550,000 estimate. And so the 20% is actually lower than what our engineer's estimate is. It's actually based on the construction costs. So, and I believe, I don't have that number in front of me, but it really is the difference between the 465 minus the 387, which is the indirect costs. And then you've got the other 42,000 that the city is
Yep.
contributing. So that's how the costs are breaking down.
Okay. No, I was just asking about the selection of the company, that's all.
Yeah.
Okay,
Sorry.
thanks, Brad.
Gentlemen, anything else? Brad, just real quick, to John's point, he makes a good point. How are these people chosen? How do we know they're gonna do quality work? And I think just a very short talk and inform us as to when we pay these engineering costs to your firm, what is part of the quality control that you do while this company is out actually doing their own? Can you just touch on that real quick?
Yeah, so we'll have inspectors on site while the contractor's doing the work, and we'll have our testing firm testing the materials, the bituminous, the reclaimed material, just to make sure that it meets spec. And our inspectors will be out there. We typically provide estimated quantities as part of the bid. And so our inspectors will actually go out, collect the tickets for the bituminous, make sure that we're paying what we get, measuring the reclaimed areas, and any other items that are in the bid. So we will be on site. We don't anticipate this project taking more than 2 weeks, probably.
Right.
Once the contract gets started, he'll reclaim it, and then shortly thereafter, he'll come back in and pave the road.
But we will have your engineering staff out here on site checking both the material and the workmanship as it goes
Absolutely.
forward. Okay,
Absolutely.
that's really the key I wanted to get and make sure that the council understood that. And just one other thing, Brad, I want the council to understand that tonight what we're doing is we're declaring the cost to be assessed and ordering the preparation of proposed assessments. So we'll need to come back, and stop me where I'm wrong, we'll need to come back to another meeting and actually approve those assessments to the homeowners, correct?
So we'll declare costs tonight. We'll set the public hearing for potentially next month.
Sure.
And then at that hearing, we will set the final cost of the assessments, which would be sent to the county. Now, of course, people have the option to object to their assessments either in I think it does have to be in writing, so they can file that with the clerk before the meeting of the hearing, or they can come to the hearing and
And we'll deal with that when
Yep.
we get to that point. Kim, just real quick, Kim, a question for you. When do we set the bonding period for this in any of the professionals can answer this? So a 10, 15, or 20-year bonding period, when is that set and how is that typically done?
So typically that's set by council. And the interest rate. I think I provided you with some
Yep.
assessments that we've assessed in the past.
Right.
Typically, it's always been a 15-year assessment, and we've used 4.5%.
Okay.
Typically, the interest rate is typically set about 1.5 points above the bond rate, the rate that you purchase the bonds. You know, because that's a fluctuating market.
Right.
But in the past, we've used 4.5%.
Okay.
But that's completely up to council.
That's up to
Years-
council, and it happens at
years
the
and
next
rates.
hearing, does
Yep.
it not, if I'm not mistaken?
Well, I think it's actually said in this resolution that we have in front of us. So.
Okay, you do have it at 15 years. I'm sorry, I skipped right over 2, didn't I?
Yeah, so I think it's in resolution 2020-10.
Yep, I see it there.
Item number 2, we've got it set for 15 years and 4.5%, but that's typically, again, that's up to council to set.
And my question is this, Brad, because we've got some fairly unusual financial things happening right now in the markets. So if if the cost of borrowing money were to go down, would we be able to change this through the assessment hearing? Or is this set in stone once we do this?
No, you can change the rate.
Okay.
Before we send out the final assessments. Once we have that hearing, that'll be the point where we set the final
Thank you.
cost.
Thank you. And that's what I was worried about, because right now we've got costs really moving around in the market, so I just want to make sure we could adjust that moving forward. I was assuming the 4.5 and 15. I'm sorry, I didn't read it there. The other thing that I do want to point out to any residents who may be watching this or in the audience is it looks to me like these costs came in about half, Brad. It's almost 50% less than we had projected. Is that not correct?
So I think the assessments in the feasibility report were just over 12,000.
Mm-hmm.
And we're projecting these assessments to be less than 7,500 or more in line with what we've done in the past.
Mm-hmm.
Again, when we look at the feasibility report, it's a high level. We like to be conservative. Now, I know it may have been a little bit too conservative, but again, I would rather be more conservative and err on that side than err on the low side and have a big surprise for everybody.
And I would agree with you, as long as we're not being so conservative on those numbers moving forward. For example, you're gonna tell us about a new petition that we have, that we're not so conservative on those numbers moving forward, that we're pushing off some of these projects.
Right, now again, too, it depends on density too, right?
Okay.
When we're looking at the feasibility report, we're looking at large lots and we're not really diving down into the details of all the buildable units that are within a project area. And so density does have an impact to the assessments.
Certainly, yeah, the division has an impact there.
Right.
Okay, well, at this price and at this assessment amount and for the amount of road we're doing, it looks like people are probably gonna save more money on wear and tear to their automobile than the assessment. So it looks like we have resolution number 2020-10. If anyone would like to make a motion to Kim, go ahead, please.
Mayor, council
What am I
members,
missing?
the first resolution is 2020-09, declaring the cost and setting the assessment hearing.
Went right by it. Thank you very much, Kim. Gentlemen, this is on the table in front of us, 2020-09.
I make a resolution or a motion to approve the resolution 2020-09, calling for the ratification of an assessment hearing.
Thank you very much. Do I have a second?
Second.
All those in favor of said motion, please signify by saying aye. Aye. And those opposed? Thank you, gentlemen. We'll move on to 2020-10, where I had started earlier. The resolution declaring cost to be assessed and ordering preparation of proposed assessments for the 2020 street improvement project. You did both, or all of us heard the engineer discuss both the cost of lending can be changed, as well as the some other parameters of this project. So at this time, I would entertain a motion on 2020-10.
So moved.
Got a first. And do I have a second?
I'll second.
Very good, gentlemen. And all those in favor of 2020-10 signify by saying aye. Aye. And those opposed? Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you, Brad. We're going to move on to I think you have something else for us here, don't you?
I do. I have a couple other items here. The next item is we did receive a petition for the area known as Pine Street Estates. It is a petition received from a couple residents. We did hold a neighborhood meeting last fall, and we went through the process of petitioning a street project, an improvement project with them, and out of that meeting, we had 2 or 3 residents champion a petition. And so, again, most of the streets in this area are gravel roads currently. The roads that were included with the Pine Street Estates are Huron Avenue, it's north of Highway 96, 99th Street North, 99th Street Court North, 99th Street Circle North, and 101st Street North. And so we had 18 out of the 52 people sign the petition, which is right on the lowest limits that is applicable by city assessment policy and state statute, and that it was 35%. So I guess with that, I would leave it up to you to ask any questions or comments.
Perhaps maybe just a quick clarification here for our newer members. When our residents pass around a petition in order to gain and you probably already know this, but to do a feasibility report, what happens is that once they get to 35% of the affected homeowners, then a feasibility report can be ordered by us. So we approve the petition and then we go ahead and order the report to be done. And that report, Brad, lays out initial costs and figures for those residents to start sort of digesting. Is that, can you expand on that, please?
Yeah, so that's correct. Most of the people that are petitioning are more interested in what the cost of these projects will be to each one of the residents in the project limits. So we do go through, again, we do a high level cost estimate, don't dive into the details of how many buildable units are there, or we don't dive down further into the buildable units, and come up with a rough cost estimate and a mock assessment roll during that process.
Okay. And we have reached the 18 to 52, so they're at 35%. So we're looking to approve the resolution number 2020-12, which is a resolution declaring the adequacy of the petition, pardon me, that has been signed, and ordering the preparation of the report as Brad has just described.
I'll so move.
I'll second that.
And all those in favor of 2020-12, please signify by saying aye. Aye. And those opposed. Thank you, gentlemen. Brad?
Yeah, Mayor, members of the council, the last item I have on the agenda here is a renewal of a pothole roadway patching contract. We were caught off guard a little bit with Brockman Blacktopping Company going out of business. They had the contract for the last several years, I think over 5 years now, and their contract was expiring at the end of April. But we thought it was important to get some quotes out to folks prior to the road starting to fail because of the freeze thaw cycle that's happening currently. We did send out quotes to 2 or 3 contractors, but we only received one back. That quote was from Asphalt Restoration Company. I did receive some references, and they're a reputable company. So I guess with that said, I know our contract is typically for 3 years, but maybe in this case, since they are a new subcontractor, that we would recommend maybe a 2-year contract rather than the typical 3-year contract, but that would be up to the council.
Okay. The question I have is both for the engineer and our administrator. We have one bid here. And is that, for lack of a better term, proper for us to move forward without having multiple bids here?
So we did make an effort to go out for quotes. And again, like I said, we only received the one quote back. And I think as long as you make a good faith effort in going out for quotes, that it does meet the requirements. So
Okay.
I think we're
We
good.
did advertise and follow all of the set requirements to get this quote.
We didn't advertise, we sent out individual quotes to contractors.
You did,
And we sent it out to 3 contractors, and we only received the one quote back, so.
Chris, anything to add to that?
No, I think it is sufficient legally, if
Yeah.
that's how you choose to proceed, yeah.
Excellent, very good. So you're proposing then, Brad, a 2-year contract just to check performance and lock in our price, I would assume,
Correct,
at these levels?
correct.
Okay, very good. Kim, what type of a motion would you like here? Sorry, go ahead. Yes, please, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, you know, with the two-year, contract, do you have any performance outs if this company doesn't perform to the standards that you would expect?
You know, there are some language in the contract that provides the city an out after 30 days if you're not satisfied with their performance. So there are clauses for the city to get out of the contract.
I'm sorry, 30 days?
After the start of the contract?
No, I think after 30 days after, you know, the
They've done some work, so we can see how they are, or?
yeah, no, I think
30 days
that's,
after you sign the ink, and then
Yeah.
they haven't done a thing yet, and say,
Let's let Kim talk. This is a standard clause that you find in all of our contracts.
yeah, so it's
Every
30-day
contract
notice
that
you
we
have to
sign.
give them, right?
Yep.
So you give them 30-day notice if you're not satisfied with the work that they're doing,
okay.
and then you can terminate the contract.
Kim, do you want to expand on that? Your hand was up.
No, you answered
Very
it.
good, Mr. Schaefer.
Quick question, how does this quote compare to last year's contractor Brockman's?
So so it's comparable. The quote they gave us was a rate that is a combined rate. Now Brockman typically listed his rates separately for each piece of equipment, and I think we'll ask the same from the contractor to get that information. But the price that he gave us is comparable to what Brockman provided us. Again, the bituminous mix that they pay for is a pass-through cost, so whatever the market rate for the bituminous will be passed through. It's just the labor rates that are locked in, so
Okay,
that's typically how we do it.
all right. So this contract, it's basically an hourly type of thing. So this company works for other, you know, possibly cities, private people, that type of thing. Do we get does the city of Grant get priority with this contract?
You know, Brockman was a really good contractor. They were very responsive, and I guess that's one of the things that we're gonna have to figure out here with this new contractor, to see how responsive they are. I'm sure they've got other contracts, right? I'm sure they've got other work that they're doing. But we'll just have to see how responsive they are.
Okay,
And if if we're not satisfied, then again, we can give them a 30-day notice and terminate the contract, so.
okay.
And if I might jump in, Kim, please.
Mayor and council members, I will just add that there was a timing issue here. We certainly could have taken more time to reach more companies, get more quotes. We don't need to do a bid. We did not want to be in a situation with, as Brad said, the weather. We've got potholes to fill, and we didn't have a contractor.
Yeah, it's, obviously, we've got to get out there and get these holes filled as soon as we can, as soon as the weather conditions and the freeze-thaw cycle allow us to get that done. Obviously, there's some monsters out there growing.
And I also believe that one of the reasons we probably didn't get more quotes back is because it's not a big contract.
Unfortunately, we're not very large. I will say one thing for Asphalt Restoration Company, or the gentleman, the company that did send in the quote. They are local, aren't they? Aren't they within the local area here?
Yes, they
Which
are.
is good. So hopefully that will approve or improve their service to us. And we can get here a little bit faster. Yeah, get here a little bit quicker, a little bit faster. Kim, what are you looking for on this?
If the council so chooses, a motion to approve the contract as presented, with the bid as presented from Arc Paving for a 2-year period, starting immediately.
Okay. You know what the clerk would like, so you can go ahead and make that motion, gentlemen.
So
I-
moved.
So moved. John, you got a second there?
Is there a second?
All
I
right.
was gonna read it, but so moved. That does it.
If I may offer a friendly amendment to that, both of you, Brad did very quickly say he would like to see the cost broken down more along the lines of the Brockman earlier quotes. Brad, do I understand that correctly?
Yeah,
Kim,
we are
please.
working
Mr.
on
Mayor,
that.
council members, we already have that, and that will be added to
You
the
already have
contract.
that?
Yes,
You
we
already
do.
Fantastic, don't need it. Got a first and a second, all those in favor of a 2-year contract, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed. Thanks, guys. Gonna get our potholes done. That is good. Jennifer Askamp, you are up.
Good evening. Excuse me. Good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. Before you this evening, we have a continuation of our discussion that we started at the February meeting for a conditional use permit located at 10629 Jamaica Avenue for a wildlife rehabilitation center. So I did a fairly lengthy presentation at our last meeting, and so in lieu of that tonight, I have a pretty short staff report that I'll walk through some of the high points on that summarize some of the information that was requested from the applicant at the last meeting to be presented for you this evening, as well as then an updated conditional use permit for your consideration. So the applicant, as I stated, is looking to run and operate a wildlife rehabilitation center on the property. They do propose to use a fair number of the existing accessory buildings that are on the site, and they are proposing to construct two fairly large facilities in the future on the property to support the intended use. But those structures are not being proposed to be constructed tomorrow or right away. So the initial operations that would be out there would be actually using the existing structures and facilities. They will be doing some remodeling and improvements to some of those facilities to better meet and match what they're proposing to do. But essentially, it's a phased application. So with all of that as background and all of the details and the technical pieces, at the last meeting, the City Council requested three essentially pieces of information be brought forward so they could better make a decision this evening. One of those being a little bit more information with respect to their narrative and their intended operations and sort of the phasing and things like that. The second being an updated and revised site plan, that being the most important, I think, of all three items that we were looking at. The intention there was to make sure that we had a clear understanding of the accessory buildings that are out there today, which accessory buildings are proposed to be removed or demolished, and what structures would be constructed in the future. There was also some conversation about the waterfowl facility, which we'll talk about in a few moments, and looking at moving that location that was initially presented at the last meeting. The final piece has to do with the traffic, the access point coming from Jamaica. And I can give you a little bit of an update with respect to what I've learned even since the staff report was drafted. So those three pieces of information were provided by the applicant. I think I received them about a week ago, and then the staff report reflects that additional information. So where things did not change, I haven't provided new information. You can go back and reference your previous staff report. This staff report really is intended to summarize the additional or the supplemental information. So as I said, the site plan really became the most important piece that we needed to look at. You can see in table 1 here that I've done a revised tabulation based on the updated site plan of what's out there. I think there was some discussion at the last council meeting that they be limited to 20,000 square feet total of accessory building. The applicant indicated that that was doable or feasible and would match with their intended operations. You can see based on the table that with the removal of the buildings that they've identified and the two new facilities, that their total square footage of accessory building on the site would be approximately 18,920 square feet. So they were able to accomplish that 20,000 or below. In fact, there's a little bit of wiggle room in there as well. So from that perspective, I think they've accomplished what was requested by the City Council. The site plan color codes which buildings would be removed, so you can clearly see which ones they're intending to move. The other piece of that was the waterfowl facility that was located potentially within the wetland setback, then also within the steep slope area. You can see on the updated site plan that the applicant has moved that, and it now is outside outside of that bluff or the steep slope area, and is well beyond what is likely to be the wetland delineation edge. So from that perspective, they kind of created more of a campus, if you will, of where the structures would be located, as opposed to having them a little bit more spread out. So from staff's perspective, I actually think that the site plan is improved, and it provides the opportunity for them to actually do some buffering and add some vegetation in key areas to help protect the use from the neighbors, at least from a visual perspective. So based on the revised site plan and the revised location of that waterfowl facility, everything is now outside of all the applicable setbacks. As we discussed at the last meeting, the full building plans of what they're proposing to do are not available yet because they're still figuring out exactly what they're going to do. So the way the permit is drafted is that essentially it says that if they're in approximate the location that they've identified on the site plan and they are no larger than the square footage that's identified on the concept plan, then they would be permitted to do what they're proposing without coming back and amending the permit. If there is any substantial deviation from what's on that site plan, they would be required to come back and amend the permit and come back before you and back before the Planning Commission with a public hearing. So the intention is really to kind of memorialize their intended operation, their maximum build out. That's what's reflected on the site plan, and they will be held to that. If there's any substantial deviation from that, they would be required to come back. The last piece, which kind of actually does go into subsequent sections of the staff report, has to do with the parking lot and plan. So on the updated site plan, you will see that the parking lot was also expanded to accommodate approximately 33 vehicles if you use our calculation or our parking ratio. So the site plan was updated to indicate that area as well. So from that respect, the site plan, staff believes, is much improved and a more clear representation of what they intend to do. So obviously that's up for the council's debate, but from staff's perspective, it's an improvement. The landscape plan actually presented itself, which wasn't something that we originally looked at. So staff appreciates the forethought into saying there might be strategic areas in which there could be some landscape buffering around the intended facilities or structures, but what's not known is, based on the site plan, how many or what types or any of that information. So unfortunately, staff is actually looking to the council for a little bit of direction as to whether or not it's something we'd like to include as a condition in the conditional use permit, or whether we're satisfied with just having it identified and noted on the site plan as potential coniferous plantings in strategic areas. So staff is looking for a little bit of direction from your part with respect to your reaction to that. There are a couple different ways that we can handle it. Staff laid out a few options on page number 3 for you to contemplate. Whichever you choose, if it includes adding some conditions into the conditional use permit, staff can certainly do that after the meeting and then have it on your consent agenda, as we often do. So that's certainly something we can handle. From the parking lot and traffic piece, I'm going to combine those together because they're very related, obviously. The parking lot area, when you combine it with the existing sort of graveled or parking area that's in front of the existing home, the principal home, staff believes there's adequate parking to accommodate what the intended use is, or the traffic generated based on what the applicant has stated. So from that perspective, I think it's now sized appropriately. What we are still missing is what the intended surface or material is of that parking lot area. So you'll see in the conditional use permit that staff has included a condition that says that we need to understand what that surface is, and that it has to be reviewed and approved by the city engineer to make sure that it complies with our ordinance and our standards. With respect to the traffic, at the last meeting, the city council is fairly direct in stating that they'd like to see that the access remain and come from Jamaica Avenue. So after the meeting, the applicant did have a traffic engineer put together just a short memo to tabulate and identify exactly what types of trips or how many trips they anticipated coming in and out of the site on a daily basis at maximum build out. That's what is in front of you this evening in the memo. I passed that memo on to the county. The county indicated that it does not change their position, and they believe that there still should be an access contemplated off 107th Street. Staff's response was, well, we have to figure something out because the council has directed the applicant to figure out a location and an access from Jamaica. So that is where it stands. I have a message into the county requesting a meeting so that we can sit down and identify some options. Typically in situations like this, what ends up happening is we look at whether or not the access point on Jamaica needs to shift north or south to improve sight lines, for example, and also figure out whether or not there would be a threshold that would trip needing the applicant to install a turn lane, for example. So it's something that we need to meet with the county and discuss. This is not something that's completely unheard of. We've had many times that this has happened. I have told the county that that the city has directed staff to include a condition that says that the access needs to come from Jamica. So they are aware of that. We just need to continue that conversation and figure out what the threshold is that would trigger the applicant needing to do some improvements to that access point from Jamica. So that piece is maybe not 100% solved, but we're at least headed in the right direction with respect to the conversation. So from that respect, I think that summarizes everything that we received. In addition, I believe that that answers the questions at least that were posed during our meeting in February. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions. The applicant is here this evening as well and could answer additional questions if you have them.
Okay, just real quick, I'm just gonna summarize real quick. Thank you, Jennifer. Comprehensive. You did hit the questions that we had. Certainly the, the landscape plan we need to discuss, parking lot, surfaces, the accesses. It looks like the applicant has gotten everything set back, properly. We're down to under 20,000, 18.2, I think you said, on the site, which is certainly allowed on that size site. So, that said, let's start hitting the open stuff that Jennifer has identified for us, and it looks like John's gonna be first tonight.
Hi, Jennifer. So, I was trying to remember when we were talking about the access, and of course, the county has final say on the access of how they get in there. But I don't, did we say that it has to be off of Jamica? Because I think we have to defer to the county, and we can't really say, well, it's gotta be on Jamica, because, does it? So I don't recall us voting that it said it had to be off of Jamica. I think we have to defer to the county. And, like you said, if it's not safe without a turn lane on Jamica, then we can't really say, well, by golly, it's gotta be on Jamica. I think we gotta defer to the county.
So, Mr. Mayor, members of the council, my understanding of the conversation was that the majority of you did agree that it needed to come off of Jamica when I tabulated who said what. And so that is where staff went with respect to talking with the county and saying, we want it off Jamica, it needs to be off Jamica. And so we have done that in the past. And from an access perspective, the county, well, first of all, there's a two-part answer here. The first part is there's an existing driveway that's out there that's built to fire lane standards. So there's a 20-foot wide driveway that exists because of the existing cell tower that's out there. So it was built to a certain standard to allow for trucks to come in and out of the site and be able to service that cell tower. So the county is not really in the habit of closing access points off. That's very difficult for them. So there's the part of the answer where they may say, well, then the trips in and out of the site from that location can't exceed the anticipated expected trips that would have based on the current use, right? So there would be up to the applicant to figure out how to either shuttle people in and out of the site or figure out how to keep the traffic counts to a minimum on the site to adhere to that from an access perspective. So that would be one option because there is an existing access there. The second option is for the applicant to say, all right, we anticipate at full build out, we're gonna have 152 trips, which is what's in their memo. And the county says, well, if that's where you end up, then you're going to need a dedicated right turn lane. And the applicant needs to figure out how to raise the cash and the funds to be able to install the right turn lane. So that's what staff needs to talk to them about. If you're more open to an access off of 107th, which I did not hear at the last meeting and can certainly correct me if I'm wrong tonight, then obviously this becomes a little bit moot because you have control over the access in and out of 107th. But my understanding that there were at least 3 of you that directed staff to say it needs to come off Jamica. But again, you can certainly correct me if I'm wrong.
Well, I was just saying, I think we gotta defer to the county as to, what we want. It's a county road if it's on Jamica. So if they have to have a turn lane, the county says the turn lane, then a turn lane has to be in Jamica. If that isn't feasible or, you know, in the cards, then it's 107th. But I guess the county has to decide that along with you and the applicant as to what happens.
So, Mr. Mayor, members of the council, what we've done in the past where we've had situations like this, I can think of two over the last few years, that if there's literally no solution that can be arrived at with the county, and the county simply says the access cannot come from here, essentially we'd need to come back and amend the permit and figure out the appropriate access then off 107th. So the reality is that that's never happened, actually, in the decade that I've been here. We've always been able to come up with something with the county as to whether it's shifting the access so that there's a safer sight line, or whether it's a dedicated turn lane or whatever it is. The county, just like we do, oftentimes comes, you know, with a very strong position of what they'd like to see, and then sometimes we need to sit down and try to come up with an alternate solution. So it's not happened before. I'm not saying I don't want to say it would never happen, but typically we can come up with something that works for everybody. But if it can't, and the conditions stay as they're written now, we'd have to come back and have a public hearing to talk about how that access would work off 107th, and we'd need to amend the permit and figure out what that looks like.
Okay. All right, thanks, Jennifer.
Mr. Schaefer?
I just want to state that the entrance has to be off of Jamaica. No other way for me. This traffic impact study, is this what the county is basing their opinion on?
So, Mr. Mayor, members of the council, so it's not a traffic study, just to be in engineering world. I don't want Brad to start twitching over here. It's a traffic memo. It is prepared by a traffic engineer. He looked at essentially the trip generation that is anticipated based on the use. The use is not something that's typical, obviously. So much of it was derived from the anecdotal testimony of the applicant stating what they believe will happen based on their current traffic patterns at their Roseville facility. So from that perspective, it's not a full study. Nobody went out there and counted trips on the county road. We may end up there, to be honest. That might be what needs to happen, is that a more formal traffic study, if you will, or memo needs to be prepared that actually looks at trip counts on this portion of Jamaica, looks at the site, the sight lines and things like that, to figure out where an appropriate or safe access is. So we may get there, but this was the first start at, okay, if there's 152 trips at max, does that change the city or the county's position about access? The county engineer came back, and his response to me was, well, that's essentially equivalent to about 15 houses. And if we had a new cul-de-sac with 15 houses on it, we'd require a turn lane. So that doesn't change our position, because the trips coming from a single family are yet usually we assume there's about 10 trips per day per household. So it's very similar to that. And he's like, if we had a cul-de-sac that was going in, we'd require a turn lane. Which certainly a rational, plausible response. So I think it's just a matter of figuring out what the timeline is of when a turn lane would have to go in, and making sure that the spacing between wherever the turn lane to access this site and the turn lane to access 107th Street, making sure that that spacing is accurate and, safe and all of that. So.
Okay.
Let me speak just real quick to the CUP and the power that the city holds and the power that the county holds. And I'm not an attorney, but the CUP power, the power to grant a conditional use permit, lies with us. And we have rarely, I can't think of an occasion in my years here where we have allowed what is essentially a commercial operation to come in off of a residential road like that. This one has some different characteristics to it in terms of it not being a retail operation and not generating retail traffic type numbers. I'm a little surprised at the 152 for the type of activity that we've discussed. That seems large to me. If it's equivalent to 15 houses, yeah. But if we at this point say to the applicant, we'll do the CUP, and just spitballing here, we'll do the CUP, but it comes in off of Jamica, then that is the applicant and the county's nut to crack. That is our nut to crack. That is the county and the applicant's nut to crack, and there is an awful lot of frontage on Jamica. Jennifer smartly pointed out, county doesn't want to start closing off entrances to property because it's very difficult for them to do that. She's right, obviously. However, the applicant blocks off their own entrance onto Jamica in favor of something that the county and them have worked out. That's a very different process, where the applicant actually blocks their own access. So for me, moving forward on this, I haven't changed. The 152 trips that I'm seeing now has frankly hardened my position in the sense that I would support that the onus of that access to be placed back onto the applicant, back onto the county in terms of coming off of that county road. And if a turn lane needs to happen and needs to have an entrance closer to 107th, they've got the frontage to do that if they wish to do so. So that's where I would stand on that. Can we, have we hashed out that road thing a little bit? John, do you have more on that?
No, I just said the county and
On the
applicant.
access?
That's it.
Take it to work it out.
I think you summed up quite nicely.
Summed up, okay. Let's move to the, Gary, if you don't mind. Let's move over to the landscape. I know that Jennifer talked about that a little bit, and I wonder if anyone has questions on that or recommendations. She's made some very good recommendations on page 3 at the top about incorporating it into the site plan. So, any questions, comments on that? Mr. Schaefer, you look like you got some comments on that.
I would be in favor of doing whatever can be done to minimize views and impact to the neighborhood. So by providing certain amount of screening to certain areas, I think that would be a good thing. The only thing I would do different, or I would require, a landscape plan. I think I would like to see a mix of plant material, whether a mix of coniferous, deciduous, large shrubs, that type of thing that would fit in with existing plants and trees and stuff, instead of just a mass planting of evergreens. Something a little more natural.
Okay, so you're recommending basically a landscape plan be
Correct.
submitted to the city and to the planner engineer?
Correct.
Okay, real good. Mr. Giefer?
I guess in that regards, I'm probably leaning more towards just encourage them to make the improvements. I'm not so quite as concerned about the actual specific landscape plan, but it would be nice to have them do something with the landscape.
Real good. John?
Yeah, I would definitely make sure that the landscape plan definitely screens to the neighbors and to the, what you can see from the road, and make them of adequate size so that it's not going to take 40 years to make it so that it's not screened. So you can get some bigger trees, bigger things that are
Are you proposing a minimum tree size to be planted in there, John?
probably something a little bigger so that it doesn't take as long to grow, so that it has a quicker impact to the neighbors.
Okay.
I guess.
We've done that before. Jennifer, Brad, if I might real quick, we've mandated that landscape plans use minimum size coniferous and other plantings. Isn't that correct?
Correct. Mr. Mayor, and members of the council, the one that comes to mind immediately is actually the school CUP, where we identified a minimum caliper inch on the trees, and then we also had a 2-year landscape guarantee on that as well. So we had both. The other thing that we did do in that case, the school had proposed a landscape plan, if my memory serves me, on this process. So they proposed a landscape plan, they had it. Then we, as a council, recommended to them to actually go to the Washington Conservation District because they do have services available to help out. And so they had then ended up doing, I believe, if my memory is right, a mix of the formal landscaping plan, if you will, that had the minimum caliper inches and height in that business. And then the Washington Conservation District had like seedlings available and things like that that they supplemented with. So I believe that was how it all And then the stuff that came in from Washington Conservation District didn't have the same guarantees on it as the full landscape plan, but we essentially were able to accomplish more, because we did sort of that combination of both. So that's where a couple of those items are coming into play on page 3 of the staff report in terms of what we've done in the past, when we were trying to screen. So hopefully that helps.
Yeah. Jennifer, when I read through the conditions that you're proposing here and offering these considerations for us, number one, a condition incorporated that we must contact Washington Conservation. Yes, from me. District to prepare the landscape plan schedule, the whole thing, absolutely. And then to be approved by both you and the engineer, yes. Applicant, including a plant schedule, and then the landscape guarantee, as you just touched on, in terms of the 2-year guarantee, yes. And then, I mean, the next two are just excellent. I would encourage all of those to be incorporated within this. And I don't know if the rest of the council feels that way, but that's certainly where I am on the landscape plan. Jennifer has excellent considerations here, so.
I agree.
So, moving forward, and that can certainly, we can talk about that as we get closer to actually doing something here. Moving forward onto the parking lot plan, we've talked about this now. The applicant has given us a location of this, and it's just to backtrack a little bit, an illuminated parking area of 10,000 square feet. While it's off the line, it's not off the line as much as I'd like, and I think that the location of that lighted parking area drives my consideration and my hope that Jennifer will put all of these conditions in the CUP in order to screen that parking area as much as possible. So moving on to the parking, I know Jennifer had a couple of points on that, whether or not that parking lot shall be a, refresh my memory here if I'm wrong, staff, a dustless and, is it dustless and permanent surface? I can't remember the actual term in our the dustless surface?
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, our ordinance does state that it needs to be a dustless surface. We've debated what that means in the city a couple of different times. So I guess staff would definitely be looking for direction with respect to your interpretation of dustless.
Right.
The other thing I will say to that is I did have the opportunity to speak with the applicant a little bit about their intentions for the site or for the, and their hope is actually that they could use some kind of alternate material that's more porous and rather than like a pavement. But obviously there are porous pavements that exist, and there are certainly dustless surfaces that are porous and allow stormwater to infiltrate in its location as opposed to having huge portions of runoff. The problem, as he stated to me, I shouldn't say the problem, but the challenge is that there is quite a bit of impervious surface that's on the site today because of how the previous owner used to maintain his drive areas, et cetera. So whether or not it's actually possible to make it porous is a little bit up for debate. So there are challenges associated with it, but he's communicated that he would prefer to use something rather than pavement, but would be dustless, et cetera. So he's not proposing gravel. He would like to be able to use something that's a little bit more sustainable type of product.
And we've, I think we're all familiar with products like that. If you go to the District Education Center where I go for meetings, you'll see that under the parking areas, there are porous surfaces. They're both a combination of manufactured block, and then in between those is some type of a product that allows rain to percolate through that surface. And in terms of the ground not accepting the water right now, I would think a 6-inch dig with a bobcat across, that would probably pretty much take care of that. You're gonna have to do it anyway to install this. And while the city, you hinted at it earlier, from my perspective, has perhaps made some mistakes before regarding that dustless surface, my definition of dustless surface, as I said up here, is dustless. It's not gravel, it's not anything that's pressed down. It is either a manufactured block material, it is bituminous, or it is concrete. To me, that's dustless. Anything else I can go out there and create a dust cloud with a broom or whatever else, that's not dustless. So that's my perspective on it. Gentlemen, we need to talk about that. What are your opinions on that? John, Jeff? Yep, go ahead, Mr. Schaefer.
Well, under 32-373, it pretty much says that residential units can have gravel, a dustless gravel, but all others should have asphalt, concrete, or another approved product by our city engineer.
Right.
What that would be, I don't know. So Brad, maybe you can help us out.
Again, I think it would be like a paver or some type of porous brick that
Okay.
they would provide us to approve.
Okay. Now, we were talking the parking, this would include the driveway, correct?
Brad, Jennifer?
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, it's probably slightly dependent on whether or not the existing driveway is used or whether or not they install a new one. So if they have to shift it, then I would anticipate that the material will be the same, between the two because they will connect. But the existing drive that's out there is actually constructed to a fire lane standard that was done as part of the old CUP. So it's my understanding that actually there's quite a bit of material, that reclaimed material that's mixed into that driveway already, and it's not a purely gravel surface. So unless you wanted to additionally condition that whatever gets put onto the parking lot is also put on the drive aisle, the intent was that they were going to use the existing driveway in its current state. I don't know if that will remain because of what happens with the access with the county, but.
Right. So this is an evolving situation between the driveway and the county and the applicant. So that, I mean, from my perspective, what I might do is not even address the driveway at this point, because if they're going to work with the county on that, and we do specify that the parking surface does need to be the dustless, as you pointed out, well, then it probably makes sense for the applicant to do that. Or perhaps move that material over. But why get ourselves embroiled in that right now? We've got to figure out what the parking plan is, and then the applicant's gonna go back to the county and crack that nut in terms of access, right? So if we can get the lot down and the lighting down and those types of things, that can come back once the county brings this plan back to our professionals. Does that make sense? Reasonable?
Yes.
Okay. Mr. Giefer?
Well, so, yeah, I agree with leaving the driveway alone for now, and, yeah, as far as the material of the parking lot, I mean, it's definitely not gravel, and to me, I agree with what the mayor said here, dustless is concrete, blacktop, or some sort of pavers, and, I'm not aware of any other substances. I don't know what the applicant, maybe he can come up and speak later, what ideas he has in terms of, the material, but that's my thoughts on it.
Okay. And, yeah, our ordinance 373, Mr. Schaefer, thank you for reading that aloud, is pretty clear. And I'm not sure I need any further input than that. And while the city has, in my view, and in view of my past votes, has perhaps made some mistakes in this regard, two wrongs are not going to make a right in this case. So I think overall, John, do you have other input here in terms of the surface of this parking lot?
No, I don't. I think your point is well taken. Dustless is dustless.
Okay, very good. So I think the professional of the staff, Jennifer, has that. The illumination plan, Jennifer, do we know anything more about that? When I think about the neighbors and I think about the impact on the neighbors, if the county can crack the nut of getting these cars off on Jamaica, and then the neighbors across the street and to the east and to the south, really, the main impact to these folks should be the lighting. There shouldn't be a lot of noise generated here, and we already have a noise ordinance. So do we have any more information about the illumination that's going to take place on the site?
So, Mr. Mayor, members of the council, in our previous review, the applicant stated that they were not actually going to light any, that was the original statement. When this plan came back, the word illuminated appeared on the plan, and so that's the extent of what I know. What I presume, and the applicant's here and can certainly speak to it, because I've not had the opportunity to, what I presume is it's it's similar to what we reviewed, for example, when we looked at the wedding barn, where there were low lights, not, 25-foot poles or anything. But there, they did low lighting in the parking lot for safety when people were exiting and going to their cars. So they put them on like 6-foot posts or whatever it was.
Even shorter, yeah.
yeah.
30-inch, I think we had there.
Yeah, they were very short. They were to light walking paths, for example, to light when you get into the parking lot to make sure that everybody could see if, there was disturbances in the pavement or whatever from a safety perspective. My assumption is that's what we're talking about because the applicant talked at the last meeting about how they didn't really want to have a lot of lighting out there, and because of what they're doing out there, they really don't. So my assumption is it's a safety thing. We can clarify. That's why staff approached it the way they did in the conditions and said, essentially, we need to have some specifications. If it's what I think it is, if it's like what we looked at with the wedding barn, we don't necessarily need a photometric plan. The photometric plans are a pretty extensive thing that if you've got 25-foot poles, you absolutely need to ensure that you're not having spillage. If we've got small lanterns in the middle of a parking lot or lighting walkways, we're not going to meet the foot candles at the property line. There's no way. So staff approached it as, tell us what the specifications are. If they are tall poles, light poles, that are the traditional, then we're going to require a photometric plan, and you need to demonstrate that it complies with the ordinance section. If it's not that, then we just need to know what the specifications are, make sure that we understand it, make sure that it's not going to adversely impact the neighbors. So that's what staff proposed as condition number 5. There's an additional condition that we wrote in here, number 30, which says that all lighting has to comply with section 32-321, the city's lighting ordinance. So I think we're covered in both respects to that, but the applicant could certainly speak further about what illumination means in this respect.
Okay, you bring up a great sort of a reminder for us, for those of you that were here when we were doing the wedding barn location. There are very, very few lights up and spilling onto other property. Everything's low. They were on little 30-inch towers. There's just little LEDs that lit people's walking paths just for safety's sake. I would like to, if it's all right with everyone, I'm going to ask the applicant to come up real quick. Sir, if you could come up, I just have a couple of questions on that lighting, because we didn't have many answers last time. If you could just identify yourself for us, please, and then we'll...
My name is Phil Jenny. I'm the Executive Director of the Wildlife Rehab Center. I also have with me tonight our architect, Harvey Sherman, who is the one who did such a good job on the site plan. So.
Real good. Just a question for you, sir. We had talked very, and it was sort of a loose discussion, if you don't mind me characterizing it that way, about the illumination.
Yeah.
At that time, you had told me, well, we really don't want illumination because we've got wild animals. It's going to throw them off. And at that point, I think I said something like, you'd better light your parking lot or people are going to trip and break their neck. So you have added illumination to this. What I'm concerned about is that we're not going to have those 20-foot poles that our planner just talked about in terms of the security lights up, like at a barn you might see, or at the end of a cul-de-sac street, that type of thing. Do you have any plans for anything like that?
No, absolutely not. In fact, the little solar panels, we just want to, actually in light of what you had said, make sure that people can get safely to their cars.
Okay. Okay, but so you're not proposing any additional lighting to light the buildings up, or security lighting, anything like that? You shouldn't require it, I wouldn't think.
No.
Okay, all right. I just want to make sure. Gentlemen, do you have other questions for Mr. Jennings regarding the lighting plans and what they're thinking about there?
Yeah, well, just when the lighting plan, you do put it in, I'd just like to see what you're proposing and some
Sure.
pictures perhaps of what you're gonna buy.
And Jennifer, that will, if I understand your conditions correctly, what we'll do is that will be actually part of the conditional approval. That'll go to the staff for your approval on those. And you're well versed, obviously, you and the engineer, in terms of the downcast lighting and the candle power that can escape to the line. Okay. Well, that's good. I'm glad I have you on record saying none of those big lights.
Yeah, no.
'Cause dark is good.
Dark is good. That's right, yeah.
We like our stars out here.
Yes.
I want to see the stars.
Yep.
Okay, thank you very much, sir. If you want to have a seat, and then if we have additional questions. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
It's not related to lighting.
Mr. Jennings is up there. Go for it.
The parking lot material, obviously you heard our concerns about
Yep.
that. What are your thoughts in terms of what material you'd want to use there?
Well, we would do whatever the city wanted us to do. I mean, I feel that just environmentally, it's better to have that water rather than just capture it all on a flat, impervious surface, to have it have a chance to filter through something. I know in Ramsey County there are some parking lots that they've used in their parks where it's very similar to what you were talking, Mr. Mayor, where you it's almost like a grid, almost like a concrete grid, and then in between, and they're almost like pads. It's some other kind of surface so that it does allow the water to go down into it. Now that's just our. I wouldn't even call it a preference. If all things being equal, it'd be nice to do that.
Yeah. Again, from our perspective, under 32-373, at some point, it sounds as though the council is of one mind on that we will be doing or asking you to do a dustal surface there.
Yep.
Certainly, you're close to a fairly large and scenic pond there.
Yes.
Would like to see as much infiltration on your site as possible,
Right.
and not going down that hill. And as long as I'm there, we did have sort of, again, a bit of a loose discussion the other day when you were here last month about, just so I understand, manure management. That's going to go off-site, sir? Is that the plan? That's going to go off-site. It will
Yes.
not be stored there. It will not be
No.
buried there. There will be
Right.
no treatment plan on site.
No.
Okay, how will you get rid of that? Where will it go?
Well, because of the nature of our patients, they're so small that for the most part there isn't, it's not like, we don't even have anything that's equivalent of a golden retriever, in terms of waste. And what we do in our current facility is the volunteers they clean up before they're changing food and doing what we call the husbandry, as they're taking care of the animals. They clean the ground, and they take, we use straw and hay and things like that, and we put it in garbage bags, and Waste Management hauls it away.
That's right.
We
Okay.
have 20, in Roseville, we have 20 Waste Management tubs that get picked up, so it gets hauled out.
We have a local business called Maroney's. You might want to check into them.
Yeah.
Just saying. Other questions?
And when a question regarding the screening, so you have 3 coniferous screening locations here, right?
Mhm.
So that's part of the site maybe this question's for Jennifer, but that's part of the plan. Do we need additional conditions, or is?
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, so the additional conditions, as I understand them, would essentially be what are in the staff report on page number 3 that we just addressed. So staff would add a condition that the applicant has to work with should reach out to the Washington Conservation District. They should prepare a landscape plan that includes the plant schedule, that they need to submit that to city staff for review and approval, that we would be looking for a 2-year guarantee with it. So essentially, we would take these 4 bullets and do some wordsmithing so that they are actual conditions, and that those would make it, and then supplement the site plan. So
Okay.
the site plan will be attached to the conditional use permit, and the landscape plan, actually, oftentimes we attach that as well, and we certainly could in this case as well. So we'd be actually looking for a detailed landscape plan to tell us how many plantings are actually going in those blob areas, which is a very sophisticated term, I know.
Okay, so it may be more comprehensive than these screening areas, and the Washington Conservation District, they might have something else to say about that, is what you're saying.
In the past, they've been very helpful to our applicants. I've had several of our applicants comment on how responsive they are and helpful they are in giving feedback of, what are good plant types to put in, what's a good mix to make sure, and what's the spacing like to make sure that they'll survive. So they've been, from everything I've been told, I myself have not worked with them, but everything I've been told is that they were very helpful. So that's why staff suggested that that might be a great opportunity.
All set?
Yep.
Just want to add one thing, when you said Washington Conservation District, and regarding your possible pavement, they will cost share with, say, like a rain garden or something, right, so all your runoff from the paved areas, they're really easy to work with, and I've worked with them in the past, so.
We have, okay, yeah. We look forward to that. I mean, it would be, we would like to improve the property throughout as well. A lot of it was horse pasture, and, you know, adding pollinators and native plants and all that sort of stuff would be a nice addition.
Jennifer, I remember the plan that we got, I'm gonna jump on this real quick. The plan we got from Washington County Conservation District regarding the north end of the Wildwood Elementary, and they did lay out the actual plantings, what was going in the individual holes and in terms of the screening. My only concern here is that Washington Conservation District, I'll show you be on top of this, but know where that parking lot is, where the anticipated lights are, what the anticipated, you know, the sight lines from the neighbors over there, you know, even an aerial so they could take a look at it, and I'm sure they'll do that, so that they know what we're trying to screen.
So can I just?
Go
Mr.
ahead,
Mayor?
yes, please, yeah.
So the applicant really can't rely on that the Washington Conservation District is the only party at the table.
Okay.
The applicant typically has their own either architect or landscape architect that helps and works with the Conservation District so that, because they need somebody on their behalf who knows what the objectives are and knows that the planting needs to accomplish those objectives. And then they work with the Conservation District. So it's kind of a collaborative process from that perspective.
Reading through the considerations that you've offered us on page 3, it's obvious you've done this before. And those considerations, again, seem to be excellent and should be included. It sounds like the council's of one mind on that. Mr. Jennings, last month when we had you here, you didn't know too much about, as I remember, and correct me where I'm wrong, about when you were going to be building out, when these things could happen. Do you have any further information on that for us?
Don't really have any other than our general capital campaign plans for, which really anticipate, you know, if you think about preparing plans and getting bids and securing permits and then actually putting something in the ground, you know, we're talking 2 to 3 years out. And so certainly for the next 12 months, there probably will be very little activity other than with the current buildings. So ideally, the plan that we're currently working under is that in 2025, we would have everything accomplished that we wanted to do.
Okay. I will say this, just so that you sort of get a heads up on this. When we've had these CUPs before that are sort of concept plan CUPs, nothing is really done yet, but the applicant comes to us and says, in the next 3 to 4 or 5 years, these are sort of the things I want to do, and here's what my concept is. I will say this, just so that you know, probably a lot of us are going to be here in the next 3 to 5 years, and we'll be watching this closely to make sure that this adheres to this, and that those conditions and everything are being adhered to. Because, you know, you worry about kind of like that mission creep sort of thing.
Yeah.
Things get a little bigger and a little grander, and you know, we just want to make sure that this is what
Yes.
we're maybe approving tonight, okay?
That's right.
This, okay.
Yep.
All right. Just to make that clear. Jennifer, what other questions would you like us to discuss tonight? John, go ahead, please, Mr. Jennings.
Well, I was going to ask Jennifer, Kim, these buildings, you know, they're not traditional buildings. Is this something that our building inspector has to get involved with for these? I mean, these are cages with the roof on one portion, and they're not typical buildings, but does the building inspector have to get involved with those?
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, yes, the building official will be involved absolutely in the main nursery structure, absolutely in the waterfowl structure. The revised plans have the caging areas as not enclosed, not structural. If anything were to change from that perspective, the building official does get involved. So the answer is yes. The other piece that we've identified in the conditions is that because of the facilities themselves are slightly unique. Obviously, a main nursery facility, for example, is not something we typically see. So we've directed in the conditions that the applicant needs to work with our building official to make sure that if, for example, we need to have some ADA compliant parking stalls, for example, out there, that those are installed. If we need a bathroom that meets that expectation, so as the design plan is put together for those facilities. So the permit specifically puts the building official on notice and the applicant on notice that those commercial building standards may be triggered, and if they are, that they need to work together to figure out as we go through. Once again, if there's any issue with that and something can't be resolved, then the applicant would be required to come back and potentially amend the permit. So the answer is yes. It's definitely a unique situation because the structures are just not things we typically look at, right? But in particular, the main nursery structure feels like it might trigger, for example, the need for an ADA compliant parking stall, as an example. So Jack, our building official, if he's still our building official in 5 years when they build it, will be involved.
Thank you.
All right. Just a couple of things. Sir, I want to thank you for sending us both your federal permit, rehabilitation permit, as well as your DNR permit for wildlife rehab. A couple of things in here that I did note as being important was number 7 under the Minnesota DNR about releasing animals and where they are to be released, and they will be released in the county or as close to the point of where they were captured as practical, so they will not be released into our environment here. They'll be released back into where they were.
Yes.
I also noticed that the federal permit talks about the imprinting of humans upon these wild birds, and that they don't appreciate you imprinting them and want you to keep them as wild as possible. To that point, you have talked a little bit about having gatherings here, about having larger sets of people here. And under what circumstances would those take place, and how often would those take place?
Well, I think we backed away from that after the feedback that I think at the last meeting you had said something about, in fact, it's one of the conditions in here that there would be no events. Now, we have volunteers here, and we do occasionally, at the start of our nursery season, we might have a bunch of volunteers come in and help clean up. But in terms of public events for releases, we wouldn't be doing any of those here.
Yeah, I would expect that all of those public events take place at your Roseville location.
Yeah, typically, that's right. Yep. We have a fundraiser that we do that's a public event that's out in Medina, so there are things that we do, but this is not.
As long as it's in Medina.
Yeah, well, and part of the thing, as you correctly note, is you don't want to do things that draw a lot of people to the animals because you don't want them to get any more accustomed. I mean, they're going to be around people, but you don't want them to be right on top.
You want them scared of people. Yeah. Healthy animals are scared of people, or at least wild ones. Okay. Jennifer, do you have anything that we have not covered here that you would like us to discuss or cover?
No, Mr. Mayor, members of the council, I think we've covered everything, and I understand we need to add those conditions related to the landscaping in. How we've done this in the past, depending on where you go with a recommendation of approval or denial, not a recommendation, a decision. Staff would go back, make the corrections that you identify, we'll add in the conditions that you've identified, and then it would be placed on your consent agenda at the next meeting, so that you'll see a clean copy of it with all the edits in it and the language. Yep.
Yeah, the additionals on there. Great. I will say to kind of wrap this up, if the council doesn't have additional questions or concerns for Mr. Jennings. John? Jeff?
Thank you,
sir. We look at this, and the only thing I can really compare this to in the city is I drive down along our 60th Street frontage road on 36, and I see a probably a 7,000 or 8,000 square foot veterinary building down there, surrounded with fencing, parking lot that's probably 3 times the size of the one we're talking about here. And I look at the screening that they have there, and it seems as though they're making a minimal impact. If this one is not a retail location, people are not dropping off or picking up animals, and we've got veterinary students there who, and vets there who, I mean, I was roommate with all those people, and they're very antisocial, so you probably won't be seeing any of them. They like animals a little bit better than people. We probably won't be having a huge impact here. Now, I've heard some folks describe an adversarial take on this situation. I'm perplexed by it. I still haven't heard anyone tell me exactly why. It fits within the code, it fits within the use, and properly conditioned with the CUP, the impact should be minimal to my estimation. I can't figure out how it wouldn't be. And I'm usually pretty suspicious about those things, and I can't figure out how it would be more than a minimal impact. So, with that said, Jennifer understands our conditions that we've laid out, the dustless surface, the landscape plan that you've discussed, the lighting plan that you've discussed, and it's all coming back to you for approval, and they're back on our consent agenda, as you said earlier. I guess at this point, if there's no other questions or concerns from the council or the staff, I would entertain a motion.
Okay, I'll make a motion to approve resolution number 2020-06.
With the draft conditions.
Correct, with the conditions that we discussed tonight.
I'll second.
And I have a second on that. All those in favor of stated motion signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed?
Nay.
All right, real good, guys. Thanks, moving on. City attorney has no items. Consideration of planning commission appointments. Tim, do you want to jump into that? You want me to grab that?
Mr. Mayor and council members, the city advertised and published vacancy, taking applications for the planning commission in January. The deadline to submit applications was January 24th. The city did receive 3 applications. The following Monday, January 27th, another member of the planning commission did resign. So there is another open seat. My recommendation would be that the city advertise on the city's website, open up for another 2 to 3 week period of applications, and then set up interviews prior to your April meeting.
Yeah, I would agree. A active planning commission with people who are committed to it is key to giving us good information and good decision-making. Do you need a motion to table this or anything, or what do you want on this?
Yeah, feel free, just to
Okay.
table to the
Do I have
next
a
meeting.
motion to table to the next meeting, gentlemen?
I'll make that motion.
Very good. And second, John?
Second.
All those in favor of tabling this to the next meeting signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Thank you. All right, looks like I'm up. Consideration of Resolution 2020-11, which is a preliminary assessment that the Comcast cable franchise should not be renewed. As you know, I've been your cable commissioner for years now, and let me just talk about real quick what a franchise is. So the city owns right-of-way. It's where all the poles go, it's where our power goes, and the city can charge for permitting on that right-of-way. The city can charge for use of that right-of-way. It's actually city property. You can be charged to use that property. Comcast has, through its legal team and through the Cable Commission itself, which comprises 11 cities now, actually puts together a master agreement called a franchise agreement that allows Comcast to use that right-of-way in order to bring cable to your homes and businesses. They've been doing that for about 20 years in Grant. So they've had that franchise in Grant as the only cable provider, monopoly if you will, for cable providing in Grant for about 20 years. Our contract with Comcast as a consortium with the commission came up about 2.5 years ago. We have extended that several times now. And in fact, 2.5 years ago, when there were negotiations in place, I was able to get about 1.5 miles more of Grant wired up. So we were able to wire up more homes as a result of those negotiations. However, those negotiations never came to fruition. It never ended. What they wanted is Comcast kept asking us to extend this. We did. And then at this point, these negotiations have hit a dead end. And the dead end for me as your cable commissioner is the unacceptability that only 1/3 of this city is wired up with high-speed internet. There are many people running small businesses in this city that cannot get high-speed internet. They cannot advertise, they can't change their websites, they can't do a lot of things because they don't have high speed in this city. We're about, 8 miles from downtown St. Paul? It's unacceptable to me. Unacceptable. And we've been unable to get Comcast to see that from our perspective, as well as many other problems that they've had in terms of paying the correct amount of revenue. When they're stringing that cable and they're running it in and they have a monopoly on it, there should be a revenue component to using that right of way. And that revenue component is also under a very tough negotiation at this point. So you'll see here that for those of you who's looked at this, it says that the Comcast cable franchise should not be renewed. What that truly is not the end of cable in Grant. What it really is the start of a federally mandated process where we both go in front of a judge, and that judge starts to judge these things for us because the negotiation has really come to loggerheads. So it's the start of a federal process, and many other cable commissions across the state have done this as well. So my point to you is this: negotiations are at a loggerhead. Grant is not getting the service it should have after granting a 20-year monopoly. More of our city should be wired up than it is right now. That is my position. I will not come off of it. A year or 1.5 miles after 20 years additional, it's unacceptable. Unacceptable. So entering into this federal process gives us a much better ability to force that build out and to make sure that we're getting this high-speed cable to our businesses and to our homes, both for entertainment and for business. It's just unacceptable. So what I'm asking the council to do tonight on behalf of myself and the cable franchise and the licensing commission is to approve Resolution 2020-11, moving us into this federal process.
So moved.
Very good.
I'll
Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Thank you very much. All those in favor of 2020-11, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed. Thank you, gentlemen. Kim, do you want to do the fire service contract?
No.
No, no.
I'm not sure why it's on the
I
agenda.
was kind of wondering that myself. It should have been on the consent.
Yes, it should have.
That's what I'm wondering. Would you like
Yes.
us just to make a little motion here to approve it, or?
Yes, I would.
Okay. Well, we've got a fire contract here with Stillwater. As you know, Grant is split up into both the Montemita and Stillwater fire service contracts. Stillwater obviously does our eastern side, and Montemita, for the most part, our western side. So we have Kim, how do you want this stated? Just approval of the fire service contract?
As presented?
Okay, very good. Do I have a motion for that?
So moved.
Thank you, John. And a second to approve this.
I'll second.
All right, very good. All those in favor of approving the Stillwater fire contract as stated, please signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
And opposed. Thank you, gentlemen. No unfinished business. Do we have any staff updates? Updates from the staff? Any action want to take? Okay. City council reports, future agenda items. Just real quick, I did go down to the Valley Branch Watershed District meeting on Thursday. They are in charge of permitting the road raising down in the Sunnybrook area. There were a couple of little snags there, but we did get that permit to move forward. So hopefully, under the direction of our engineering staff, we can get our local contractor down there and get moving on that as fast as possible. As we've all seen, we've got some really warm temperatures, and these people need to be able to access their homes. So that, in my mind, it's completely unacceptable if that happens, so we've got to get these roads raised. So questions on that in terms of the permitting process? Questions for Brad? Brad, when do you think we can get going on that?
You know, we should have the permit in hand by the end of this week, so.
Great. And
Early next week, we can start raising.
Klein
the
Brothers
roads.
are ready to start there?
Yep.
Well, that's
Okay, good.
fantastic. That's good news. It's good. Those Klein Brothers are fantastic. Love those guys. Any other city council reports?
I just would like to make a suggestion, whether we should look at our accessory building code,
Okay,
in particular the 20 acre or more.
okay.
I know our 15 to just under 20 acre accessory building maximum is 4,000 square feet. And then once you reach 20, it's unlimited. That's quite a jump. And
It is.
Tom had kind of brought it up last meeting regarding this wildlife rehabilitation center. And I just thought maybe we should look at that sometime.
I think it's a great discussion for the council to have, number one. I'm not sure when we look at some of these horse farms that we have, and we look at the average riding arena, for example. So the average riding arena is gonna be, what, 10, 12, 15,000 square feet, just the riding arena. And then you've got to start housing the horses, and you've got hay, and you've got tack rooms, and you've got all that stuff. So I think that's how originally it came about. But having the discussion, I wonder maybe if we shouldn't ask Jennifer what she's seeing in some of the other communities that she does planning for and have done in the past. What are you seeing on that?
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, I will say it's unusual to have unlimited.
Okay.
I can't actually think of anywhere else that I've worked in the last 20 years that has unlimited.
Okay.
However, you actually are one of the few places, I would say, that is this close to the metropolitan area that actually has very large contiguous acreages left.
Right.
So it's a little tricky to look at other, there's just not a lot of comparable communities that really have a lot of large acreage left that's this close to the urban area, if you will. So it's a little tricky from that perspective. I'm thinking about, I worked in Medina for many years. They don't have unlimited, but they do have very generous amounts. And then they also permit you to go beyond a certain amount with conditional use permits. So that's part of, I think, unless they've changed it, which they could have because I haven't been there in a while, but I do know that they took the approach of, for a standard accessory building, et cetera, here are the square footages. If you're going to go beyond that, then you need the conditional use permit, and then they base it on, the topography, the existing site, whether they're screening, those types of things. So there's different ways to, communities handle it. I will say that the unlimited is unusual. So I guess that would be my.
Well, Jennifer's telling us that is an unusual condition that she sees. Medina is, although on the far western edge of the Twin Cities, they're about the community I see about as close to us as I can imagine.
What are you saying, a cut and paste? Is that what
Yeah,
you're saying?
no, I'm not saying that, but I always love stealing stuff from other cities so we don't have to write it. Kim?
Mr. Mayor and council members, why don't I add this to the list for us to look at some point in time? We've got the ongoing list that we are actually starting next month with the planning commission with some ordinance revisions. So we will add this and take a look at it.
And take a look, and then at that point, if I may, just to clarify, that will go in front of the planning commission if that's something that
Yes.
you want them to take a look at. Is that a good start
Very good
for
story.
us? John, how do you feel about that?
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
that we can do a better job.
Jeff? Okay, good. We've got a plurality of the council. Anything else, gentlemen? Very good. Who would like to read our community calendar, please?
I can do that.
Very good. Go ahead.
It's a Matamidi Public Schools Board meeting, Thursday, March 12th and 26th at the Matamidi District Education Center at 7 p.m. Stillwater Public Schools Board meeting, Thursday, March 12th, at Stillwater City Hall at 7 p.m. Washington County Commissioners meetings on Tuesdays at the Government Center at 9 a.m. And the presidential primary election, March 3rd, 2020, at 7 a.m. Through 8 p.m. at Woodbury Lutheran Oak Hill campus, which is why we're meeting on a Monday.
Right on 60th Street, so go vote if that's your thing. I'm sure it is. Motion to dismiss, please.
I will make the motion to adjourn.
Thank you. Second.
Second.
All those in favor of adjournment signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Thank you, gentlemen.